Good morning. I'm Dwight Keene. I'm chair of the Kansas Corporation Commission. I'm joined this morning by fellow commissioners Susan Duffy and Commissioner Andrew French. At this time, I will call to order this meeting of the Kansas Corporation Commission on this Thursday, June 2nd, 2022. Commissioners, the first matters for our consideration this morning are 18 items on the consent agenda. We've been provided with drafts, at least, of the orders in each one of these matters, and I would turn to each of you and ask if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, and I'll begin with Commissioner Duffy.
Good morning, Chair Keene. I have no questions or comments.
Thank you. Commissioner French.
Morning, Commissioners. I have no questions, comments. I move approval of the consent agenda.
And I second Commissioner French's motion.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. We have one noticed item on our agenda this morning. It is docket number 22-NETE-419-COC. This is in the matter of the application of NextEra Energy Transmission Southwest LLC for a certificate of convenience and necessity to construct transmission facilities in the state of Kansas. Before us this morning, order on the petition for reconsideration and petitions for intervention. And our presenter is David Cohen, Assistant General Counsel. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Commissioners. Before you is an order which grants KIC's petition for reconsideration and grants intervention to renew Kansas Biofuels Association, Kansas Grain and Feed Association, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, Big Heart Pet Brands, and AgCo. I'm going to sort of break it up and talk about the petition for reconsideration first, and then the interventions, and then both because it all is sort of related. On February 28th, NextEra filed an application for a certificate of convenience and necessity under KSA 66131 to build and operate a transmission project from Wolf Creek to Blackberry. On April 28, 2022, the Commission issued an order which granted KIC intervention in this matter subject to limitations. Specifically, the Commission stated that KIC describes its interest as retail ratepayers, and KIC is granted intervention on that basis and within that scope. On May 12th, KIC filed a petition for reconsideration stating that the Commission's limitation was vague and did not provide detail as to how KIC can participate in the docket. Onto the interventions. In early May, the Commission received petitions to intervene from Big Heart Pet Brands, AgCo, Renew Kansas Biofuels Association, the Kansas Grain and Feed Association, and the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association. It should be noted that KIC and the above interveners are all represented by the same firm. NextEra stated that it did not oppose the interventions of AgCo and Big Heart so long as they are subject to the same restrictions as KIC, but did not provide justification as to why those restrictions would be appropriate. NextEra stated that Renew Kansas Biofuels, Kansas Grain and Feed Association, and the Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association should be required to identify their membership under KR 82-1-204, which states that no unincorporated association shall be granted party status without first identifying its membership. While NextEra acknowledged that Kansas Grain and Feed and Kansas Agribusiness Retailers were incorporated, NextEra pointed to a previous Commission order where the Commission stated they have an interest in knowing the membership of even incorporated entities. There's some dispute as to whether Renew Kansas Biofuels is in fact incorporated. The Commission's research suggests that it is and is therefore not subject to 81-204. While the Commission has in the past shown interest in determining membership of incorporated organizations, no such need or interest has been expressed here. This order grants intervention to all the above parties. Because KIC is represented by the same firm as the other interveners, and those other interveners have all been granted full intervention, it no longer makes sense to restrict KIC's intervention. Additionally, given the amount of interveners in this matter and the fact that so many are represented by the same firm, the commission is ordering KIC, Lawrence Paper Company, and the above interveners to combine their presentation subject to KAR 81 or 82-1225 in order to better effectuate the prompt and orderly conduct of the proceedings. I'm available for any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for that overview. Let's see if there are any commissioner questions, comments, or concerns. I'll begin this time with Commissioner French.
Thank you, and thank you for that overview, David. My only comment would be I am not going to vote in favor of this order simply on the reconsideration piece. I do want to make clear I completely support the granting of interventions to the additional parties. I would have granted their interventions subject to the then existing limitation on KIC's intervention. I think that was a well-reasoned and logical order. I would not have reversed it. I think this order is less well-reasoned and logical. That said, I would point to paragraph 22, where the commission says it continues to believe the prompt and orderly conduct of the proceeding is best served when each party appropriately limits its participation to the matters in which it has a concrete interest in standing to represent a claim. I completely agree with that statement. And so I think while I won't be joining the order, I don't think there's actually that much daylight between the three commissioners as this order is drafted. I simply wouldn't have reversed the prior order. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner French. Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. I would agree with Commissioner French's description that there's not much daylight between us. If it wouldn't have come across as yelling, I would have put paragraph 22 in all caps. We have a process we go through, and it just seems like we have a lot of trauma before we're even out of the gate. And I want to stay clear and stay focused on the issues and not on and I don't want to use the word circus. Oh, I used it, that it appears to be going on right now. We've got an issue we need to tackle based on the facts of the case. And so that's how I will proceed. It's great to see all the interest that this has sparked. I think that's excellent. And with that, Chair Keen, I move approval of the order as written.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Duffy, and I will second that, given Commissioner French's inclination to not be in favor of the order. Is there any further discussion? I wasn't intending to say anything, but I'm going to now. I'm going to be very succinct. I don't think there's any resemblance to a circus about what the procedures are taking place here. These are all serious. There are differences of opinion about some subject matter, but I too agree that I think maybe the differences among the commissioners is relatively small, but there are differences. To me, I could have accepted the order with or without paragraph 22. Frankly, I didn't think it added much. That's all I'm going to say. The order, I think, speaks for itself beyond that. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I would call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Very well. The commission, having voted 2 commissioners in favor and 1 in opposition to the order is approved. Thank you all for your discussion. I appreciate it. The final matter for our consideration this morning is an important one. It's a discussion item. This is the quarterly update on the Southwest Power Pool activities. Once again, we're fortunate that our presenter is former chair and commissioner Sherry Albert, who basically serves as our SPP working group consultant. Good morning to you, Sherry.
Good morning. Bear with
Your
me.
microphone is off.
Oh, is it off? Is it on or off?
You're good.
Okay. Bear with me.
You're on. You're good. We can hear.
All right. Very good.
Sherry, I turn the floor over to you. It's yours.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I get the right sharing here. I don't know that I'm at full screen. I'm sorry. And
Click from beginning right there.
from beginning, gotcha.
Uh,
You-
yep.
Should we, is it good to go now?
Sherry, what you have there, it's good. You're good now.
Okay, all right. Let me get back to, well, this is essentially the beginning slide. I'm here to update you regarding the quarterly SPP meetings, which were conducted on April 25th, and the board met on April 26th, 2022. The RSC meeting is composed usually of an educational session in the morning, the business meeting in the early afternoon, and then a joint stakeholder meeting, usually around 3 o'clock on the afternoon, preceding the board meeting on Tuesday morning. I will go to the next slide, I hope. Let's see. There we go. For the RSC business meeting, we really only had 2 voting items. One of which it was a HIT M1, and that HIT is that holistic integrated tariff team. That was a process that I was directly involved in when I was on the RSC starting in 2018, and was voted on by the board and RSC, I believe, in 2019. So there's an item there that I'll be discussing a little bit later on. We also had an RSC bylaws modification, which I will address here in a bit. We also had reports from the cost allocation working group on some of the activities that we all are involved in. And then we also had a couple of action items that came out of the RSC business meeting. One of them being the HIT M1 congestion hedging improvement issue, but also a new one that was added with this round of meetings. It's referred to as revision request 465. It has to do with generator interconnection self-funding, which I will discuss here in a little bit. Regarding HIT 1, M1, the congestion hedging, this was a recommendation that came out of that HIT process about looking for ways to hedge load against congestion charges. And it was specifically concerned with optimizing counterflow for adding to the excess that would build the excess auction revenue funding. SPP grappled with the issue, has been grappling with that issue since 2019, and really before the HIT process. They formed an advisory team in 2020. They hired an outside consultant to sort of figure out what's the root cause of the congestion hedging issue. What are some of the funding problems associated with that? But despite all of that activity, the market working group, the stakeholders were not supportive of that coming out of the market working group. So it was the subject of more conversation at the quarterly meetings. SPP staff ultimately made the recommendation to the board of directors that just let's keep the current market construct in place, which that was approved by the market working group, went through the strategic planning committee, went through the cost allocation working group. But when it came to the meetings at MOPSI a couple of weeks prior to these quarterly meetings in April, it failed narrowly at the Market and Operations Policy Committee level. And so it was discussed by the RSC and at the business meeting, and determined that, yes, we recognize SPP staff's recommendation to keep the current market construct, but there was a sense that there was a lot of interest in trying to resolve a problem and to not sort of kick the can down the road. If there's an issue here, whether we're looking at what other solutions might exist to address those hedging options available for congestion costs. So SPP or the RSC ultimately adopted a recommendation to approve HIT 1 with SPP staff's recommendation to maintain the market construct, but encouraging staff, SPP staff, stakeholders, and COG continue assessing any alternatives that might improve the ability of market participants to hedge that congestion costs. So on the board, during the course of the board meeting, the board adopted a proposal to essentially figure out a multi-step process for SPP staff to lead, and setting a year-end deadline for that to work through the working groups again. So they are seeking proposals from stakeholders to resolve the issue, and they'll continue to coordinate some resolution of the issue, hopefully between COG and RSC. And I believe it has been discussed at the market working group since that time. I'm not sure there's much additional support within the market working group, but I think they are collecting stakeholder proposals, and we'll see how that proceeds from here. The RSC bylaws modification. The RSC bylaws have been in place since 2004, when SPP was recognized as an RTO by Ferc. And when SPP filed their bylaws at Ferc, they included a provision for an RSC. However, while there have been some changes to RSC bylaws since that time, I don't believe there have been any changes to SPP bylaws pertinent to this particular issue. And membership, RSC membership, has really essentially been defined in terms of state commissions having jurisdiction over a member of SPP. And there's really not been any reference, although I said no explicit reference to them being members within the footprint of SPP. And as it stands now, I think there are about 110 members of SPP. Some of them are IOUs, co-ops, municipalities, Google, we have a couple of gas pipelines, there are pipeline interests in there. So we have a really diverse mix, as well as other like wind developer folks. And so we have lots of different membership, and some of which are operating in every state in the United States. So it was felt that there was a need to establish that the RSC membership needs to be represented by states within the footprint. So that's what the language does, is that it frames the membership on RSC to the SPP footprint. That passed with one abstention. That abstention came from Oklahoma. But what that puts in place is we had a recommendation not only for RSC bylaws to be changed, but a recommendation that the SPP bylaws be changed as well. So that will be up to the Corporate Governance Committee of SPP. The other issue which came up this round of meetings had to do with revision request 465, which is generator interconnection self-funding. This provision currently exists in the SPP tariff. However, there really was no process for how those provisions were to be implemented. So our 465 was proposed to establish that process for self-funding. And it went through the working group processes and was approved by the tariff working group revision. I'm having a hard time with the R there. Anyways, the tariff working group, the transmission working group, and the MOPSI. And during the course of the MOPSI did make the vote approving the RR. And however, that vote was appealed to the board of directors by generator developers who felt that there were retail rate impacts associated with that self-funding provision, and that COG and RSC should have an opportunity to review for any retail rate impacts associated with that particular revision request. And in the process of raising that appeal, that issue will be coming to COG and the RSC for further review. And the COG meeting is next week on Tuesday. And that is probably the most significant item on the COG agenda. We are having presentations from both the sponsor of the revision request as well as generator developers who raised the appeal. So we will be considering that at our meeting next week. The joint stakeholder briefing exists as an efficiency measure more than anything else for SPP staff who are making presentations to RSC and the board, not to have to make the same presentation 2 days back to back. And so they're all incorporated here. RSC meets jointly with the board of directors and members committee. This is just a rundown of the agenda that was discussed there. I have devoted slides to most of these individual items. I will note though that there was a value of SPP and transmission presentation, which I don't have a slide devoted to, but I do have notes for that particular aspect of it. And I don't know if I can access my notes on this particular slide, but overall, the value of transmission, let me look real quick, one other spot, see if I can get to it quickly. Okay, so according to the presentation that was made, I believe to transmission, or well, in this stakeholder briefing on SPP provided $2.7 billion in savings and benefits to members, and it breaks down with the following. For operations and reliability, those savings amounted to $878.8 million. For markets, it was 1.4, little upwards of $1.4 billion. For transmission, $376.9 million. For tariff scheduling and services, $37.8 million. According to SPP's calculations and report, that results in an 18-to-1 benefit to cost ratio for SPP benefits and the value of transmission in that footprint. Let's see. IRATF, this slide is just kind of a reminder slide of the scope of IRATF when it was formed and what we're really looking at. These are the tier 1 recommendations coming out of the winter weather event. The next slide is a little bit further background. Now, I have not submitted to you, and I have it available, the winter weather, the report. They have revised the IRATF report. They've got a new format. It's got an updated timeline. It reads very, very nicely. I had previously had a link to it in there, and I do show where it is, but I will provide that to you, commissioners, so you can get the full benefit of what's in there. We have mostly been working on some scope initiatives, revising that. A lot of the work that's being done is being done behind the scenes by staff, SPP staff. And it's the issues that are coming up really have to do, that are coming kind of to a head at this point are, we're looking at performance accreditation for conventional resources. We're looking at availability. We're looking at the planning reserve margin. And I'm going to give you a little bit of detail about some of those topics, just so you get a little bit better appreciation for how it all fits together. So accreditation is the method for assessing the generator's ability to reliably deliver capacity to the system. And during 2021, the winter weather event, a majority of the accredited capacity was not available, and fuel supply issues were kind of identified as the largest single cause of the unavailability. Under our current accreditation construct for conventional generation, it's based on essentially a 1-hour capability test and a 4-hour continuous availability requirement that exists. And it's so the accreditation that exists on the system now for conventional generation is essentially just those two, the test and the availability requirement. And there's no consideration of any outages and whether or not the resources are available when they're called upon to respond. And so it really is more reflective of nameplate capacity for those resources, not so much the actual performance. So the current methodology tends to overcount the capacity of those resources. And so IRATF has sort of tasked SOG, the Supply Adequacy Working Group, who has the expertise in this area, to take a look at what changes might need to be made to that accreditation process. And some of the risks that are involved with that have to do with, as you would expect, more periods of shortfall, capacity shortfall, and the increased frequency of emergency events, which could lead, as we found in 2021, lead to load shed. And so, and one other concern is right now, SPP has advanced tariff revisions for renewable resources, which is based on electric load carrying capability, which is a performance-based accreditation methodology for renewable resources. So there's a concern that this without changing, we don't have a comparable performance-based methodology to those renewable resources. So.
And Sherry, I might just interject here that this is part of that ELCC issue that you've probably been hearing about, that some of the renewable resources are complaining at Ferc about, that they're being treated differently than traditional resources. And so just to add some color of, I don't know that this is exactly giving them the remedy they seek, but I do think it's SPP's attempt to recognize or to try to treat resources on a similar basis, but in the way that SPP thinks is appropriate.
And along with, thank you for that, along with the this issue of accreditation comes the what I'll refer to as the cushion, the planning reserve margin. Load serving entities are required to meet their obligation to serve 100% of their load, plus carry a 12% cushion reserve margin for unusual, out of ordinary circumstances. SPP is a summer peaking RTO, so it's based on, the reserve margin is based on the summer peaking requirements. And with a shift towards looking at developing looking at performance over the winter months and creating a seasonal accreditation for a winter a winter season. There's discussion about the planning reserve margin. Should it be the same as the summer? Should it be different? What should it be? So we're looking at all of those kinds of issues right now. In order to get to the annual planning reserve margin requirement, SPP uses a loss of load expectation analysis, which has a standard of meeting 1 day in 10 years to determine that planning reserve margin. And in SPP's tariff currently, the planning reserve margin is enforceable. It's an enforceable summer requirement. And there are financial penalties associated with the inability to maintain those requirements. However, and there's a process by which those load responsible entities have to make that showing that they meet those requirements coming ahead of the summer months. Winter season obligation is essentially the same as the summer season right now, but there's no financial penalty for failing to meet that. So those are some of the issues that SPP is trying to rectify by looking at performance-based accreditation. It's believed that it'll help account for the actual historical performance, which means it'll take into account those outages and some of the availability issues. And so
can I ask Sherry, so their
Sure.
timeline on this is what? That,
Well,
I mean,
here-
I think this is good, but what's their timeline for putting it in place?
Well, here's what I will tell you. Yes, on Tuesday, these issues have been sort of subcontracted out to the Supply Adequacy Working Group. They will come back to IRATF, which next meets June. I'm trying to remember June, what the specific date is for that. But in any event, the SOG on Tuesday approved the adoption of the SPP staff's proposal for this performance-based accreditation.
Okay,
It just passed Tuesday. It will come back to IRATF with
Okay.
recommendation at the June meeting. And I think that the idea is that this will go to be ready for decision in the July round of meetings.
okay. All right.
And the other thing that came up in the SOG meeting on Tuesday this week is that they're looking at the planning reserve margin and whether or not that needs to be increased from 12%. There was no action taken on that, but the proposal is to recommend raising that to 15%. The problems that arose in the discussion surrounding that have to do with, okay, we've been planning our resources for 12%. When does 15% go into effect? What do we do if there's a capacity shortfall in the meantime? What are the costs involved with that? And so there's a lot of questions about that. And so the discussion, there was no vote. It was just, here's what it looks like. Now there are 62 load serving entities in SPP. I believe the information that was provided is that there are 6 who would not meet that 15%, but the amount that is in issue, the shortfall that exists is 180 megawatts spread amongst those 6. So they're trying to figure out, what does that look like? What's the impact? What do we need to be looking at? Another issue that has been underlying all of this accreditation conversation to do with availability. And, we're talking here about resource adequacy. And there's been a lot of discussion about, are there market incentives that would help with making sure that resources are available when they're needed, when they're called upon. So that would be a market incentive, either positive or negative, for those resources to do what they need to do to either get a fully accredited amount or have whatever that capacity is that they need to have available. One of the terms that's come up in discussion that is just starting to come up in discussion has to do with looking at it from a perspective of energy adequacy. And I think that really ties more into the availability piece of this. So I think we're going to see a lot more discussion about how availability figures into this equation. And so, I mean, I heard just this morning on an operating reliability working group call that the Midwest Regional Reliability Organization is starting to talk more and more about energy availability and what that looks like. It's a different construct than resource adequacy necessarily. So we'll need to follow that closely, and I will start paying close attention to that and see if I can find more information to provide to you related to that. But I think that's going to become more of an issue. And there's been some suggestion that perhaps there's going to be more of a move away from the kind of the current resource adequacy, which we're starting to see a little bit with looking at performance-based accreditation.
Sherry, if I could just add, I think you made some really good points. I just wanted to pile on top of them. It is interesting to me that they are considering bumping up the planning reserve margin in the short term, given that we already have these other potential reforms ahead of us. I mean, I guess I want to hear more about it, but the way I'm thinking about it now is the planning reserve margin seems to be a rather blunt instrument, perhaps a costly instrument, and just upping the amount of capacity that our utilities carry, as you kind of laid out, that doesn't guarantee that those are the type of resources we need, or that that capacity is actually available when we need to call on it. And so, it seems to me that, and I think I've heard the market monitor say this, that the better accreditation you have, the more accurately you can measure your resources and understand their availability and perhaps compensate them for being available, then you can have a much lower capacity planning reserve margin if you know what resources you actually need and what you can count to show up. So I guess the way I'm thinking about it now is it seems like that's the smarter path to go down, to figure out, what resources we actually need to count them accurately, rather than just using that blunt tool of having everybody acquire more capacity to count in their margin. But it's certainly an interesting discussion. I've been following it, not as granularly as you have, but I've been following it, and it's an important discussion, and the idea of availability to me is pretty central. So thank you.
I would agree, Commissioner French, exactly with what you're saying. And so also the ability to, not only availability, but ability to move it where it needs to go. And I think, so you're right, it's not just upping the amount and calling that good. It's more complicated than that. And sometimes I think, are we sure that we are maximizing the amount that we have right now, and it really is being used wisely, and perhaps it is sufficient, but maybe
that's a great point, and that's actually something you said is something that I think Sherry can confirm has gotten discussion, which is the concept of deliverability. Just because you have capacity on paper doesn't mean it's there to meet the need. And so it's all this discussion of what is, is the resource available? Is it deliverable? And what's the optimal least cost way to meet our needs?
That is accurate. I was going to chime in and mention that the deliverability, there is a deliverability steering committee that's meeting once a month. They are grappling with these issues right now, and are looking at deliverability, how it works, how it should work. Do we need to create deliverability areas? How do you define them? Is there one for the whole footprint? Are there multiple? So they're looking at all those issues right now.
I think that is, from what I've been reading, I think that is so key to everything before we start increasing limits and incurring costs. I think we really need to understand. It's kind of like if you look at the footprints of roads and highways, how many gravel roads and dirt roads do we have? And do we need to asphalt them, or what do we do? Do we need a 4-lane highway here, or can we really work with whatever? But I think the deliverability is probably the most difficult issue.
Yeah, and so those are, like I said, ongoing discussions, and I think we're going to see all of those issues intersect at some point, hopefully sometime, maybe at the end of the summer, in the fall. So maybe we'll see significant movement on some of these issues by the October course of meetings. It's hard to say at this point. But like this last bullet on this slide shows, these are all the initiatives, sub-initiatives that we have going on tier 1. Now there are tier 2 and tier 3 initiatives that are primarily within SPP staffs and other working groups jurisdictions. They have a number of them. It may look like progress has been slow here. I know that in terms of performance-based accreditation, the hope is that there'd have been something ready or a decision made in March, but it's been kind of slow going. But I think it's been beneficial, I think, to hear what people's concerns are. And it seems like there are new ways of looking at things, and they're coming into the discussion. I know there are industry groups, whether it's IEEE or EPRI or whatever, that are doing significant amounts of research and work in some of these areas. And it makes sense to sort of capitalize on some of that work as well. So it's not probably as timely as one would have hoped at the outset, but I think there's a lot of pressure. The other thing that we've been looking at IRATF are reliability attributes. We had a really great educational session on reliability attributes and how you measure them and what you need, and how valuable are they and how do you value them, and what kind of requirements should or should not be placed in tariff requirements to ensure reliability of the system. That presentation was made on May 25th, and I have that available. If anybody is interested, I will certainly make that available to you. And I can certainly do that. With regard to the tier 1 status report as well, I can put both of those in your inboxes so that you have that information accessible to you.
So when you say reliability requirements, requirements by who? Well, there are things that SPP, they're by SPP beyond what we do.
Well, what they're reliability attributes. They're industry recognized reliability attributes. And let me see if I can find my list of them.
That's okay, but I think that's where wouldn't they pretty much be the same? I mean, that's,
well, some of it has to do with black start capability.
Okay, all right.
Inertia, ramp rates. Some of those requirements, trying to think, they relate to transmission system, but they're recognized by industry. They're kind of a really a best practices now, and that's what the question is are there minimum requirements? What do they need to be? And does it vary by resource? And if it does vary by resource, how do you account for those differences in a fair way?
Okay.
And I think it's worth pointing out, there is probably a lot of intersection between the authorities of SPP in the states. And that is one of the reasons why resource adequacy, I mean, these recommendations will, Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, these would all get run through the regional state committee before they are put into any sort of tariff provision, or at least any major resource adequacy reform. So I think they're probably more granular than what a state looks at in any particular rate case, but they are sort of the rules of the road reliability metrics that our utilities would be expected to abide by in making their procurement or construction decisions for generation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because our reliability our reliability standard in Kansas is essentially efficient and sufficient service. So Commissioner French is right. These are a more granular kind of an industry standard practice for a system to operate efficiently. I'll go to the next slide. The SEAMS Liaison Committee is, so I'm shifting away from SPP alone to SPP and the MISO SEAMS issues here. And I've talked in the past about rate pancaking. And the SEAMS Liaison Committee put together, the staff for them put together a rate pancaking straw man based on a lot of those individual meetings that they were having with stakeholders. They presented that for the first time on May 18th. And given that that was the first time it was presented, they established a June 10th deadline for feedback on the straw proposal. So they didn't take any action on the proposal. And there wasn't that a great deal of discussion on it because that was the first time they'd seen that straw proposal. So they established this deadline for feedback so that they can go forward in August on that. The other aspect of the SEAMS Liaison Committee was an update on the interregional cost allocation that has to do with that joint targeted interconnection process that SPP and MISO are engaged in. They had developed 7 projects that were identified to mitigate some constraints along the seam. Now, 2 of those projects were within the MISO long-term planning. So 2 of those projects will probably get pulled out of that 7 project plan and will be funded by MISO and MISO stakeholders. But in any event, that project portfolio is still in play. What they're trying to figure out now is what needs to be done for cost allocation methodology. But I will confirm for you all that the SPP and MISO did modify their joint operating agreements that was filed in Ferc, and I believe both of those were accepted by Ferc this week. So those changes and those modifications have been adopted by Ferc, so they are going to be able to go forward with those changes going forward. And right now they're in the midst of discussions about cost allocation methodologies. The most recent meeting on May 20th, SPP advanced a proposal which seemed to have has a little bit of traction. It's hard to tell. There seemed to be a lot of interest. There were still lots of questions. So that is ongoing discussion there. And I think it's a departure from what has happened in the past with cost allocation, trying to find a way to reach some common ground. So we'll see how that progresses as time goes on. Another thing that's coming out of that was on the agenda for the SEAMS Liaison Committee was SPP and MISO have decided to create a common SEAMS initiative. It'll be a semi-annual joint meeting of MISO and SPP stakeholders to help bring more focus to those kinds of SEAMS issues and those other, SEAMS and cost sharing issues that are being coordinated by SPP and MISO. And it's going to be facilitated by the staff of each organization. And there won't be any voting structure. They plan to meet in May and November each year. They did have their first meeting May 17th. I wasn't able to attend. It was just kind of their lead-off meeting, but they will invite stakeholder presentations, I think, as people desire. So I think that's a good move to bring a little bit more cohesive approach to working through SEAMS issues. So this is just one step further, and I think that's a good sign. SPP West update. The DC ties has still, there's something of an issue there, trying to figure out resolving that. The original deadline for executing the financial commitments was April 2022. Given the DC ties issues that remain unresolved, they've extended that, the board extended that to April 2023. The CPPTF task force is meeting. Most of these meetings have been sort of educational, but in the last meeting, they're starting to look at figuring out what the path forward needs to be. And I think they have maybe 3 options that they're considering. And I think they meet later today and tomorrow morning. And I think they're going to have further discussion about how we move these processes forward. And I don't know if Commissioner French wants to add anything to that.
I don't have anything to add other than, yes, I do think they're meeting. It's actually an in-person meeting. I'm going to attend virtually, but it is all afternoon today and then tomorrow morning. And my review of the agenda does show that they're going to start presenting us with some straw proposals for discussion. So I think we are firmly moving out of the educational phase and starting to move into, straw proposals and discussion of how we maybe activate some of the recommendations.
Okay, and then this is just a summary of the board decisions that were made, most of which I've covered already. There's a project in transmission line project in Oklahoma that is an Order 1000 project. So it was a competitive bid process. NextEra Energy Transmission Southwest won the bid. Transsource Oklahoma was selected as the alternate designated transmission owner for that project. The other action had to do with some cost overruns on a project in Nebraska. There's like a 20% threshold for project costs. And so they suspended any further expenditures on that project, subject to a restudy. I think there were some changes that it might necessitate a change to the notice to construct, or perhaps replacing the project with something else. So they're trying to sort through those issues, and that's going back through. I'm not sure what working groups that goes through. Probably, well, the restudy probably goes through, I don't know if it'll go through Project Cross, probably go through transmission working group too. And so we'll see. I'll check on that one. There's the RR 465. The board did approve that, but of course it's been kind of sort of remanded to COG and RSC to make sure that we're aware of any retail rate impacts. And there were several consent agenda items that are discussed there. I don't know that there's anything there. The STEP report is SPP's transmission expansion plan. It's a longer term plan, and just they went over the additions to that. That was a consent agenda item approval, and then there were some other withdrawals and some modifications that they approved in their consent agenda, as well as the audit and all that. So FERC update, the NOPR is out there. The comment deadline has been extended. The initial comments are now due August 17th. Reply comments due September 19th. And then, of course, there's the FERC NARUC task force, which in a lot of ways overlaps or helps inform, I think, some of the NOPR information. And I just added to that the recent meeting, May 6th, that took a focus on, cost allocation in the afternoon. And I'm trying to remember what the morning portion of that session was.
We talked about generator interconnection
That's
quite
right.
a lot in May 6th. So, and a plug for the next meeting, I think recently they noticed up that the next meeting will be at the next NARUC meeting in San Diego in July.
Okay.
And yes, I I don't think that it was necessarily the task force intent to be the NOPR task force, but I did notice that I and my colleagues were cited pretty heavily in the footnotes of the recently released rulemaking. And so I think that is appreciated by all of the state regulators, that FERC is taking our words to heart. It appears, maybe not always agreeing, but certainly listening to what the states have to say.
I would agree absolutely that I think this sort of communication and listening is really, it really sparks in my thought process that we have made significant progress with FERC. And I don't think, it always used to be opposing entities and they appeared to not hear and listen. And I think that is changing.
Yeah, those lines of communication are open like never before. And I think NARUC really appreciates that.
Well, thank you, Commissioner French, too, for, as I listened May 6th, I really am appreciating the comments of everybody, and there is some synergy already being formed. And I think this group has been a real asset to the whole discussion and the opening up of the communication lines.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's see. Whoops. So did I skip I might have skipped oh, there's order 2222. SPP recently made its compliance filing April 28th. And so that docket is open. Interventions, comments, protests are due June 9th, a week from today. And one of the things that I found interesting about SPP's compliance filing is they had a section in there that would propose a tariff revision labeled in section 12.10 to the tariff on which talks about the role of the relevant electric retail regulatory authority, or RERA, which KCC now fits that bill. And they just have a list of voluntary actions that ARERA might consider for coordinating participation of DER aggregations in the SPP energy and operating reserve markets. And I'm trying to remember if I had a list of those. I might have had a list of those. Let's see. If not, I can sure get them to you. Too many things going on here.
I would like that list, Sherry, if you don't mind. I think
I'm trying to see if, yeah, I'll get it to you.
if you can just sometime, that would be great.
Well, I think it might be in the notes to the slide. So if you look at the slide deck, yeah.
Okay.
Let me see. That's what I'm checking, is just to make sure I have it in the slide deck. I might have added it to the notes on this slide. I thought I did. Let's see. Yes, I did. So let's see, that includes, okay, so here's what's on the list. And you should have, if you have the slide deck, it's listed in the notes section. Development of interconnection agreements and rules. Development of local rules to ensure distribution safety and reliability, data sharing or metering and telemetry requirements. Oversight of the distribution utility review process for distributed energy resources to participate.
I think we lost her.
Yeah, Sherry, we lost your audio for a second.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah,
you're back on.
good now.
Oh,
Just for a second.
oh, you know what it is? It's probably because I'm turned away.
Oh, yeah.
So where did you lose?
Oh, you were just running through the list.
If you just send it, that'll be fine.
So establishment of relations, resolution of disputes between the aggregators, the load serving entities and distribution utilities over issues such as access to individual DER data or other disputes exclusively between the aggregator and the load serving entity or distribution utility, et cetera. So those, if you have the slide deck, that's in the notes section for that particular slide.
Okay,
And then the last FERC item that I have here is that, just to update you, that on May 10th, SPP made the filing for the HIT C2 issue. It went through the process as revision request 483, and they filed that with FERC and requested an effective date of August 1st, 2022.
I think that's your next slide, isn't it, Sherry?
Yeah, did I forget? Oh, I moved
It
it.
hasn't advanced.
I forgot. I'm sorry. I'm looking at two computers here.
It's no problem.
There it
And
is.
just to confirm, Sherry, the KCC, I know we're a little behind the ball and late on the comment deadline, but our plan is to try to file comments out of time in support of the waiver process. Is that correct?
That's correct. And that is my last slide. So if you have any other questions or concerns, requests, I'm happy to take them now.
I'll just make a comment that I know how many meetings you attend and it is very appreciated. And I mean, we say this every time, but I appreciate your representation of us at all those meetings and in all your informal conversations with everyone around the region. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Sherry, this is Dwight. If you could take down the screen sharing momentarily.
Yeah, if I can stop the share, there we go.
Perfect. You did it. Well, I'm going to join with the others in thanking you very much for this presentation. I have an overview question to ask you, and I think probably I'm really directing this. Given Coma, I'm directing this probably to Commissioner French as well. If I look back at the whole scheme of things, whether it's the joint neighborhood FERC task force processes or the processes within the regional state committee within SPP, in either event, and entering into these processes, it strikes me that the state representatives approach these processes from very different perspectives. Some states have, just by way of example, to me, varying degrees of legislatively sanctioned energy plans or agendas. Many states like Kansas don't. Some states have RES mandates. Others, including some large population states like going beyond the SPP footprint, even Ohio, they don't have such mandates. And I think different states have different needs and concerns and different regulatory approaches and policy considerations. And beyond these matters, it strikes me that there are other differences that exist among the various RTOs and even among the states within our own RTO here within SPP. That's kind of a long-winded lead up to a question, with my apologies for that. So given this, and my question is, going forward, I see a whole range of big ticket issues that are coming at us with almost increasing frequency, it seems. So I guess I'm asking, to what extent is it anticipated that these various issues and plans that are being considered by either of these panels, either the task force or the regional state committee, to what extent can they or should they or will these matters be vetted at the state level within the various commissions and within our own commission prior to adoption or implementation? in particular, and I watched as well. I thought it was very informative. I watched the May 6th task force proceeding. I thought that was incredibly noteworthy and informational. In particular, I think I'm especially interested and concerned about those issues that bear on transmission and those that bear on grid reliability and resilience, resource adequacy, cost containment, and especially cost allocation. In other words, how can we refine or improve the process of vetting or educating or providing ourselves with important information on these major issues before they reach the point of adoption or implementation, either by the task force or SPP? I appreciate your indulgence in my question, and I'd appreciate any thoughts you might have.
Well, in my view, the answer is more communication. So I guess the question I have is maybe, or the observation I have is maybe a quarterly update right now is too infrequent. And so I guess that would be the question I would have back to you, is to the extent that these issues are developing on an ongoing basis from, 1 month to the next or one meeting to the next. Some of these meetings are more frequent than monthly. I can give you an update on meetings or decisions, because quite frankly, I want to make sure as the representative on COG that I have this commission's position in hand when I'm asked to vote on something. I don't want to take that upon myself. That's not my role. So I want to make sure that whatever I say and do is reflective of your desires. And so for example, the June meeting of IRATF, I don't think I have I expect the performance accreditation issue to come up at the June meeting. Whether that will be for a vote or not, I sort of assume so. It's June 22nd. I usually have a week before. So to the extent that I can kind of keep you abreast of what's on the agenda, when decisions are going to be made or asked to be made, I can set up meetings with each of you. It's kind of whatever you would like to do, or if you want to have just some sort of a regular update, monthly update at a business meeting, I can do that too.
Sure, I think we'd be open to considering any of those things, certainly the latter as well. A more frequent communication channels, I think, probably is the answer to this. Everybody here that's involved in this process this morning, we're concerned about COMA. We're not going to do anything that's beyond the purviews of the requirements that are imposed upon us by COMA. So I can't just turn to Commissioner French and call him and say, what about this or what about that on the task force, and what about this on the regional state planning? That just isn't going to happen. So I'm just looking for some way that we can institutionalize an educational process that keeps us current on these things that happen, so that we kind of are a little bit ahead of the power curve on what's likely to happen, what are the developments going on, and we can kind of maybe through that process reach some inferences about the implications it would have for Kansas and Kansas ratepayers. That's where I'm coming from.
Well, and I do meet I have biweekly meetings with the SPP work group, so I keep meeting notes for the meetings that I attend. They're usually it's done after the fact, but I mean, the utility staff is informed of what's happening at SPP through those. And to the extent that you have an interest in seeing some of those, and I could certainly send you past the information that I have supplied to the SPP working group, so you kind of are aware. And most of it is an agenda on which I have put the meeting notes from the meeting. And if there are meaningful.
Well, we lost her.
We lost you again, Sherry, temporarily.
I'll add while we're waiting for Sherry to rejoin. I mean, I think unfortunately, it's another unfortunate casualty of coma, but those SPP work group meetings, those are the things I wish you all could attend. So I think it would be helpful if you at least saw Sherry's notes and all of the notes that she brings to those, the materials she puts together. But I guess I'd probably just giving the same answer as Sherry, that I would encourage more frequent communication with the staff. I consult with them, with Sherry, Jeff, Justin, Leo, pretty often on these issues. But I also would encourage, yes, I wish there was an opportunity where Chair or Commissioner Duffy, if you could just call me up. I wish that we could do that. But I think, knowing that we need to respect the bounds of the open meetings laws, if we need to schedule open meetings and, that's logistically difficult, but if that's what we need to do, then I would just go ahead and encourage it, and we'll get more free flowing discussion going.
And Chair Keen, I would just add that I do believe work sessions publicly are fine with me. And whether we go topically or whether we just go based on the agenda items that are being considered, more the du jour, whatever, so that we're staying timely abreast of issues before they come up. I would totally support that. I think we could get into a rhythm where we're knowledgeable of the activities here, because we should be. And so I think your comments are well said, Chair Keen, about our need to be discussing these before they happen.
Let me add one other very brief comment. I want to turn back to you, Sherry. You're definitely back with us, and we're glad for that. I think we may be towards something that's a monthly event here. I'm kind of hearing that. Something with increasing frequency to increase the channels of communication and maybe enhance those, given the issues that are coming at us and the timelines that they're coming at us are so short now that it would be really helpful to kind of keep abreast of that. And those are the kinds of meetings too, I think, that we can use to sort of even shoehorn in some additional thoughts that Commissioner French might have along the path. It'll be in a publicly noticed arena where we can freely discuss those matters. Sherry, with that, let me turn back to you and where your train of thought was when we lost you.
Well, I don't know. I didn't realize that I had been lost, but in any event, that's kind of where it is. I'm willing to, to me, it's an issue of communication. It really always has been, especially with regard to SBP matters, given the structure that we have for one commissioner serving, and then yet having to, operate as a commission. It's always been a little bit of an interesting dynamic. So to me, communication is the best way to get around that, and I'm happy to do whatever it takes for you all to get comfortable with the issues that we have going on at SPP, and then helping me, it'll help inform me as to what votes I need to be taking. Because I certainly don't want to be out on my own without having any reference for the wishes of the commission.
Sherry, if you could give some thoughts maybe to turning this into a monthly phenomena.
Okay.
And
are you still doing work
the logistics? Sherry, you just cut out again. But I think
you froze.
Yeah,
but
back.
I think the question was whether we do work study sessions, and I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Sherry, think about all these format
Sure.
issues and what means by what you think could best accomplish the goal.
Okay.
And there can maybe several of those on your several menu items there to choose from. So thank you so much for doing that. It's a tremendous benefit for us, and I think to the extent these are public meetings, that's even better because it serves for those who are interested. It serves to educate the public, and that's a major plus as well.
Okay.
So very well. Anything further anybody would care to ask of Sherry that you'd care to proffer before we draw to a conclusion?
I don't have anything else. And I thank you for the interest and the direction. That's really helpful to me.
Well, two-way street here, my friend. We're grateful. We are grateful. I'll speak for myself too. I know I speak for Commissioner Duffy as well. We're grateful for the service that you and the Commissioner French both, and the time commitment that is involved in lending your rather substantial skill sets to this interplay within both the task force and SPP. It's quite consequential. All right. Having said that, I believe we're coming close to a conclusion here. So commissioners, thank you again, Sherry, so much. Always great to see you. Unless either of you have anything further you would like to consider this morning, I would entertain a motion that we adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All take care, please.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.